The winter wind howled through the gaps in the old wooden cabin like a cruel reminder of everything Daniel Cooper had lost. 47 years old, divorced, and recently laid off from the steel mill where he had worked for 23 years, Daniel found himself living in his late grandfather's hunting cabin deep in the forests of northern Montana. The place had been abandoned for over a decade, and it showed. The roof leaked in 3 places, the windows rattled with every gust, and the ancient wood-burning stove barely kept the main room above freezing. Daniel had moved there in late September, thinking he could fix the place up before the real cold hit. But money was tight, tighter than it had ever been, and every repair seemed to reveal 2 more problems underneath. His ex-wife Karen had taken the house in Portland, his savings had evaporated paying off debts, and his 2 teenage daughters barely returned his calls anymore. The cabin, inherited through a will he had almost forgotten about, was his last refuge. His only refuge. It was the first week of November when Daniel realized he was in serious trouble. The thermometer on the cabin wall read 38 degrees Fahrenheit, and that was inside, near the stove. In the bedroom, he could see his breath even under 3 blankets. He had burned through half his firewood supply already, and winter had barely begun. At this rate, he would freeze to death by January or go broke buying more wood. Daniel sat at the rickety kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a mug of instant coffee, trying to think. He had always been good with his hands, good at figuring things out. That is what made him valuable at the mill. But this problem seemed insurmountable. He could not afford a new heating system, could not afford to properly insulate the walls, could not even afford to replace the broken windows. He was trapped in a freezing box with no clear way out. That is when he remembered something his grandfather used to talk about. The old man had been an engineer for Boeing before retiring to this very cabin. Daniel was just a kid then, maybe 9 or 10, and his grandfather had shown him something unusual. A strange arrangement of metal sheets and PVC pipes in the corner of the cabin, angled in a peculiar way. His grandfather had called it his thermal circulation system, explaining how hot air rises and cold air sinks, and if you could control the flow, you could heat a space more efficiently. Daniel had not understood it then, and honestly, he had thought the old man was just tinkering to pass the time. But now, desperate and freezing, Daniel went to the shed behind the cabin and started digging through the decades of accumulated junk. There, beneath rusty tools and moldy tarps, he found his grandfather's old notebooks. Page after page of diagrams, calculations, and notes about airflow, thermodynamics, and something his grandfather called passive heat redistribution. It looked complicated, but as Daniel read through the night, huddled near the stove, something started to click. His grandfather had not been crazy. He had been brilliant. The next morning, Daniel drove his battered pickup truck into the small town of Whitefish, 15 miles away. He had exactly $243 to his name. He walked into Anderson's Hardware, a place that had been there since the 1950s, and started gathering materials. Aluminum sheets, PVC pipes, metal brackets, thermal tape, a small solar-powered fan. The owner, Earl Anderson, a man in his 70s with a thick white beard, watched Daniel with curiosity. "What are you building out there, Cooper?" Earl asked, ringing up the items. Daniel hesitated. He knew how it would sound. "Just trying to stay warm, Earl. Working on a heating project." Earl nodded slowly. "You know, your grandfather used to come in here buying strange stuff too. Smart man, though. Real smart." Daniel spent the next 3 days building his grandfather's system, following the diagrams as closely as he could. He installed angled aluminum sheets in the northeast corner of the cabin, creating a channel that would capture the warm air rising from the stove and redirect it through a series of PVC pipes mounted near the ceiling. The pipes ran along the walls, gradually descending, with small vents that would push the warmed air back down into the colder areas of the room. At the top, he mounted the small solar-powered fan to keep the air moving even when the sun was weak. It looked strange, almost ridiculous. The aluminum sheets gleamed oddly in the corner, and the white PVC pipes snaked around the cabin walls like some kind of amateur science project. But Daniel worked with precision, measuring angles, sealing joints, making sure every connection was airtight. On the 4th day, he fired up the stove and waited. Within an hour, he could feel something different. The air seemed to move more deliberately, less chaotic. He placed his hand near one of the vents and felt a steady stream of warm air flowing down. By evening, the thermometer read 59 degrees. It was working. Not perfectly, not dramatically, but it was working. Daniel could hardly sleep that night, not from cold, but from excitement. He spent the next week refining the system, adjusting angles, adding reflective material behind the aluminum sheets, sealing more gaps. Each day, the cabin got a little warmer. By the end of the second week, the temperature inside held steady at 66 degrees, even when it was 20 degrees outside. He was using half the firewood he had been burning before. He needed to share this. He needed to tell someone. Daniel drove back into Whitefish, walking into the local diner where many of the laid-off mill workers gathered for cheap coffee and conversation. He found his old crew sitting in their usual booth. Marcus, Pete, and Jimmy, men he had worked alongside for years. "Guys, you have got to see what I built," Daniel said, sliding into the booth with genuine enthusiasm he had not felt in months. "I figured out this airflow system in my cabin. It is based on thermal dynamics and passive circulation. I am keeping the place warm with half the firewood. I am telling you, this could help anyone struggling with heating costs." Marcus looked up from his coffee with a smirk. "Airflow system? What are you now, Daniel, some kind of scientist?" Pete laughed. "Let me guess, you got some pipes and tinfoil in your cabin and you think you invented something?" "It is not tinfoil," Daniel said, his excitement fading. "It is aluminum sheeting, and there is real science behind it. My grandfather was an engineer." Jimmy shook his head, grinning. "Man, cabin fever is hitting you hard. Next you will be telling us you discovered cold fusion out there in the woods." The laughter from his old friends stung more than Daniel wanted to admit. He left the diner without finishing his coffee, feeling foolish for thinking anyone would take him seriously. A washed-up mill worker playing inventor in a broken-down cabin. That is how they saw him now. That is probably how everyone saw him. He drove back to the cabin in silence, the November sky gray and heavy with the promise of snow. When he got home, he sat in his warming cabin, staring at his creation. The aluminum sheets gleamed in the corner. The PVC pipes hummed softly with moving air. The thermometer read 68 degrees. It was real. It was working. But what did it matter if no one believed him? That night, feeling isolated and desperate to connect with someone, Daniel did something he had never done before. He set up his old laptop, created a YouTube account, and filmed a simple video. He walked through the cabin with his phone, showing the system, explaining how it worked, demonstrating the temperature difference. His hands shook as he talked, his voice uncertain, but he was honest. He titled the video, "Staying Warm on Almost No Money, My Grandfather's Forgotten Heating System." He uploaded it at midnight and went to bed, expecting nothing. 3 days later, Daniel checked his email and froze. The video had 73,000 views. The comments section was exploding. People were asking questions, sharing their own struggles with heating costs, thanking him for posting. A retired engineer from Minnesota confirmed his calculations were sound. A woman from Vermont said she was going to try building it herself. A carpenter from Wyoming offered suggestions for improvements. But there was another email too. This one from Rachel Morrison, a producer for a regional news station in Missoula. She wanted to come interview him. She said his story about ingenuity and survival was exactly what people needed to hear right now. Daniel read the email 3 times, unable to believe it. Someone was taking him seriously. Someone thought his work mattered. If you are watching this and struggling like I was, if you have ever felt invisible or counted out, I want you to know something. Daniel said into his phone camera that evening, recording a follow-up video. Sometimes the answer is not about having money or resources. Sometimes it is about remembering what we already know, what the people before us tried to teach us. And if you believe that too, if you want to see where this goes, subscribe to this channel. Because I am just getting started. I am going to show you everything I learn, every improvement I make, and maybe together we can help each other stay warm this winter. He posted the video and sat back, watching the subscriber count slowly tick upward. 100, 200, 500, For the first time in months, Daniel Cooper felt something he thought he had lost forever. Hope. Rachel Morrison arrived on a cold Tuesday morning with a cameraman named Steve. She was younger than Daniel expected, maybe 35, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She walked through the cabin slowly, examining the aluminum sheets, touching the PVC pipes, holding her hand near the vents to feel the warm air flowing. "This is remarkable," she said quietly. "How long did it take you to build this?" "About a week to get it functional," Daniel answered. "But I am still improving it. Every day I learn something new." The interview lasted 2 hours. Rachel asked about his grandfather, about losing his job, about the struggle to survive in the cabin. Daniel found himself opening up in ways he had not expected, talking about failure and resilience, about remembering that knowledge does not disappear just because the world moves on. Steve filmed everything, capturing the way sunlight hit the aluminum sheets, the subtle movement of warm air, the humble determination in Daniel's weathered face. The segment aired 4 days later during the evening news. Daniel watched it on his laptop, barely recognizing himself on screen. They had titled it, "Montana Man Revives Depression-Era Engineering to Survive Modern Economic Crisis." It was not just about the heating system. It was about hope. His phone started ringing immediately. A building contractor from Kalispell wanted to hire him to install the system in low-income housing. A community college in Great Falls asked if he would teach a weekend workshop. His subscriber count exploded to 40,000 overnight. But the call that changed everything came from a man named Thomas Chun, an executive at Ecotech Innovations in Seattle. "Mr. Cooper, I watched your news segment 3 times, Thomas said over the phone. "What you have built is exactly the kind of practical, low-cost solution we have been trying to develop for rural communities. We want to bring you to Seattle, have our engineers work with you to refine the design, and potentially manufacture these systems for distribution. We are talking about helping thousands of families stay warm affordably." Daniel could barely speak. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. We would compensate you fairly for your intellectual contribution and employ you as a consultant. This is real, Mr. Cooper. What you created in that cabin matters." That evening, Daniel called his daughters for the first time in weeks. His oldest, Emily, actually answered. He told her everything, his voice shaking with emotion. There was a long silence on the other end. "Dad," she finally said, and he could hear tears in her voice. "I am proud of you. I am really proud of you." Daniel broke down then, sitting in his warm cabin, surrounded by aluminum and PVC and the ghost of his grandfather's genius, crying like he had not cried since the divorce. Not from sadness this time, but from the overwhelming realization that he had not been forgotten after all. December arrived with heavy snow, but Daniel barely noticed the cold anymore. His cabin stayed comfortably warm at 72 degrees, and more importantly, his life had transformed in ways he never imagined possible. The partnership with Ecotech Innovations moved forward rapidly. Thomas Chin flew him to Seattle twice, where a team of engineers studied his grandfather's designs with genuine fascination. They ran thermal imaging tests, created computer models, and confirmed what Daniel had discovered through trial and error. The system was not just functional, it was revolutionary in its simplicity. The beauty of this, one of the engineers told him, is that anyone can build it. The materials cost less than $300, and it can reduce heating costs by up to 60%. You have given people their dignity back, Mr. Cooper. The ability to stay warm without going broke. Ecotech offered Daniel a consulting contract worth $80,000 for the first year, with royalties on every unit they manufactured. More than the money, they gave him something he had lost: purpose. They listened to his ideas, respected his input, treated him like the skilled problem solver he had always been. Back in Whitefish, the town's attitude toward Daniel shifted dramatically. Earl Anderson displayed one of Daniel's systems in the hardware store window, with a sign explaining how a local man had revolutionized home heating. The diner where his old crew had mocked him now had his news segment playing on a loop on the television above the counter. Marcus, Pete, and Jimmy approached him one morning, shamefaced and apologetic. "We were wrong, man," Marcus said simply. "We should have listened. We should have believed in you." Daniel shook his head. You were scared just like I was. When you are drowning, it is hard to imagine anyone else can swim. I get it. But the reconciliation that mattered most happened on Christmas Eve. Emily and her younger sister Sarah drove up from Portland with their mother Karen. They arrived at the cabin as snow fell softly through the pine trees, and when they walked inside, they stopped in amazement. The cabin was transformed. Still humble, still rustic, but warm and welcoming and alive with possibility. Karen looked at the heating system, then at Daniel, and something softened in her face. You did this yourself? With Grandpa's help, Daniel said quietly. He left me more than just a cabin. He left me a way forward. They stayed for 3 days. Daniel taught his daughters how the system worked, explaining the physics, showing them how to measure airflow and adjust angles. Sarah, who was studying environmental science, recorded everything on her phone, fascinated. Emily just watched her father with new eyes, seeing not the broken man who had disappeared into the woods, but someone who had rebuilt himself from nothing. On their last morning, as they prepared to leave, Emily hugged Daniel tightly. Come visit us soon. Okay? We want you in our lives again. Daniel held his daughter close, breathing in the pine-scented air of Montana winter, feeling the warmth radiating from his grandfather's legacy. I will, he promised. I will. 2 years later, Daniel Cooper stood on the stage at a sustainable living conference in Denver, looking out at an audience of 3,000 people. His YouTube channel had grown to over 800,000 subscribers. His collaboration with Ecotech Innovations had resulted in the installation of over 12,000 heating systems across rural America, helping families from Alaska to Alabama stay warm affordably. The design had been refined, improved, made even more efficient, but the core principle remained the same. His grandfather's forgotten genius, brought back to life by a desperate man in a freezing cabin. Daniel had moved out of the cabin the previous spring, buying a modest house in Whitefish where his daughters could visit comfortably. But he kept the cabin exactly as it was, using it as a workshop and teaching space. Every month, he hosted free workshops where people could come learn to build the system themselves. He had trained over 200 people personally, watching their faces light up with the same hope he had felt that first night when the thermometer finally climbed above 60 degrees. His relationship with his daughters had fully healed. Emily had graduated and was now working as an environmental engineer, directly inspired by her father's work. Sarah visited every summer, helping him run the workshops and film content for the channel. Even Karen had softened, admitting that she was proud of what he had accomplished, proud that their daughters had a father who had refused to give up. The money from Ecotech allowed Daniel to do more than just survive. He established a foundation that provided free heating system installations for elderly people and low-income families in Montana. He hired Marcus, Pete, and Jimmy to help with installations, giving his old friends steady work and purpose. The crew that had once mocked him now worked alongside him, spreading warmth through the coldest corners of the state. Standing on that stage in Denver, Daniel thought about that November night when he sat alone in a 38-degree cabin, feeling like the world had forgotten him. He thought about his grandfather's notebooks, covered in dust and mouse droppings, waiting to be rediscovered. He thought about the moment his daughter said she was proud of him, and how that had meant more than any contract or news segment ever could. Sometimes Daniel told the audience, his voice steady and strong, the things we need most are not new at all. They are old wisdom, waiting for someone desperate enough or brave enough to listen. My grandfather knew that. And now, so do I. The audience rose in a standing ovation, but Daniel barely heard it. He was thinking about the cabin, about the aluminum sheets gleaming in the corner, about warm air rising and cold air falling, about the beautiful simplicity of physics and perseverance. Thank you for watching this story until the very end. If it touched you, if it reminded you that second chances are real, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Share your own stories of resilience in the comments below. Tell me what you want to hear about next, because your stories matter just as much as mine. Together we stay warm. Together we survive. Together we remember what truly matters.